If you're seeking freedom in a revolution, or if you're seeking freedom, you won't find it there. For once the guns stop blazing, you'll find it amazing how the world can drag on just as before.
If you're seeking freedom in a marble mansion,
Oh, if you're seeking freedom, you won't find it there.
For even when it's sunny, you'll be counting money, keeping up that showcase your face lined with care.
if you're seeking freedom on the throne of power,
Oh, if you're seeking freedom, you won't find it there.
For though then all obey you, what if they betray you? Tensually and waiting for foes everywhere.
but if you're seeking freedom, cast away desire.
Why barter like a beggar, you wealth everywhere?
For never can you buy it, grasp and you'll deny it. Freedom can't be hoarded, it's free as the air. And if you're seeking freedom, seek it on the mountains. Got sunlight on your shoulders, the wind in your hair. For there's no one can hold you, boss about or mold you. Once your heart is free, you'll be king everywhere. For there's no one can hold you, boss about or mold you. Once your heart is free, you'll be king everywhere.
Welcome to our Sunday service. It's a joy to have you here, especially to those that are guests here at the Expanding Light and all those great souls here for the International Education for Life Conference. It's a great joy to see all these faces and souls here. And just to reiterate that we'll try to end service early, no later than about 12:15. If that's a mystery to some of you, it's because Swami Kriyananda will be down at the area by the Joy logo symbol fountain at 12:30. So we're going to give all of you time to go down there to send your blessings as he leaves. He will be leaving here to go to Sacramento, and from there to Palo Alto, and then finally over to Italy. So this is our last opportunity at Ananda Village to be with him. So you're all invited to join in this and send your blessings to him. So at the end of service, Parvati and I won't be greeting people at the back there. We'll just leave you to greet yourselves and greet Swami. So this reading is taken from Rays of the One Light by Swami Kriyananda, with weekly commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. This week's topic is Victory Demands the Courage of Conviction. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. Jesus Christ said in the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 10, "Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes shall be they of his own household. He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he that taketh not his cross and followeth after me is not worthy of me. He that findeth, that is to say, that clingeth to his life, shall lose it. And he that loseth, in other words, that giveth up his life for my sake, shall find it." God tests the firmness of our faith. The sword described here is the sword of discrimination. The struggle Jesus describes is not a war against unknown enemies, but the struggle with our own attachment to all that is nearest and dearest to us, humanly speaking. Ultimately, it is a war against the ego itself, and against anything with which we surround ourselves to bolster the ego's fragile sense of security. When Yogananda as a boy fled to the Himalayas to embrace a life of solitary meditation, he was apprehended by his older brother Ananta and brought home again. At a certain point, before he would accept defeat, he whispered to his friend Amar, his companion on the flight, "Let us slip away when opportunity offers. We can go on foot to Rishikesh." But Amar, whose brother had accompanied Ananta, had turned pessimist, disclaiming any intention of continuing their adventure. Yogananda's memorable comment on Amar's refusal was, "He was enjoying the familial warmth." The spiritual warrior rejects that familial warmth. Rather, he claims the whole universe has his home. As the Bhagavad Gita puts it in the 14th chapter, unaffected by outward joys and sorrows, or by praise and blame, secure in his divine nature, regarding with equal gaze a clod of mud, a stone, and a bar of gold, impartial toward all experiences, whether pleasant or unpleasant, firm-minded, untouched by either praise or blame, treating everyone alike, whether friend or foe, free from the delusion that in anything he does, he is the doer. Such an one has transcended nature's triune qualities. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
I also want to welcome you all to Sunday service. It's always a pleasure and a joy on our part to be able to share anything of these teachings with other people. I'd like to begin by reading from Yogananda's Whispers from Eternity. He called these answered prayers. And this one is, "I demand to return home. Impediments beware, flee my path. I am homeward bound. Through the long corridors of time, stumbling often into pits of error, then lifted out by thine unseen hand, I have walked painfully. Discouraging darkness, barbed wire fences of habit, stony embankments of indolence, mountains of indifference, oceans of unfaithfulness, sirens of sense longing, may stand even now in my path, as if to prevent my onward march to thy palace. But 1,000,000 kingdoms and sextillions of years of unblemished worldly happiness will never tempt me again to turn away from thee." It's interesting that when people read the autobiography, they really like it, because Yogananda's he's very open and friendly and warm and loving, but what he really talks about is what's talked about in this reading from Whispers from Eternity, that absolute, undeniable rejection of everything worldly. And for all of us, that's really the test. And as he says in this demand to return home, it's not that we go from having the courage of conviction to enter on the spiritual path, and then we're there, and then everything's perfect. People often think about Ananda in that way. Oh, you live at Ananda village, it must be really blissful, meaning everyone's perfect and it all just flows along. And it's not with common sense. Common sense says that there's a continuum, and you have to walk that road, that continuum. You have to move from one step to the next, and you don't get there in leaps and bounds. You may have that courage and the conviction to come on the spiritual path But then the trick is, will you have that still that strong in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 years? Will you be able to maintain that original enthusiasm that brought you on the path? And I remember a few years ago, I can't remember exactly when it was, that Swami Kriyananda said, he said, you know, it's a very good idea to remember back to why you came on the spiritual path. And I think really in my mind what he was saying, I took from it, was remember the energy, remember the pain, remember what you had to go through to come on the path. Just keep that in mind of what it took to get you where you are, because once we come on the path, then it's life, you know, and we still have all of the things in our in our nature, in our personalities, with our egos, our karma, whatever it is, that we have to figure out how to deal with it and spiritualize it step by step by step. Just recently I was reading something that Swami Kriyananda had written. He's writing a book about the new renunciation. And one of the comments that he makes that I found really helpful is that the steps, something like, I'm paraphrasing a little, the steps to reaching the goal spiritually constitute countless little individual acts of will. Think about that. Don't forget that. It is very, very important. How do you come to the place where, as Jesus said, you can set aside everything that is familial, that is warm, that is comforting, that is ego-oriented? How do you ever get there? And Swami Kriyananda also says at one point in these new pages, he said, if you don't know how to do it, it's like whistling in the dark. You know, I mean, you have to know how to take step by step by step to get there. And so these countless little individual acts of will are what make it possible, and it's how we do it. And Yogananda, it ties in with what he said. He said, the minutes are more important, and you'd think that he'd say, than the hours. No, he said the minutes are more important than the years. Interesting, because it is those little countless acts of will that we make that turn our energy, our consciousness, our flow in one direction or the other. And as Anandamoy Ma said, there's two castes. There's the caste of those people that aren't seeking God, and there's the caste of the people that are seeking God. And they're like flows of consciousness, flows of energy. And all those little acts of will that we do, and we do them whether they're going in a beneficial direction spiritually or not, we make them all the time, but we're not aware that we're doing that. But that we make those as we turn more and more by each of those acts of will toward the divine, then we find that the divine is there for us, that God's grace is there for us, that we get in that flow, and it's more than just acts of will, because, you can think, oh my God, the spiritual path, it's acts of will and we're going to trudge along here. No, you get into a flow of consciousness and a flow of energy that takes you more and more and more in that direction, and that backs you up in what you're doing. I had this reading today of, I came not to bring peace, but a sword, and to set a son against his father and a daughter against her mother. And I doubt that that's a very much read scriptural passage in most Christian churches. I just, somehow, they've gotten more into the familial warmth flow, I think. It's all about happy families and children, and it's all fine. But without that understanding of deep spiritual commitment and the courage that it takes, why would Jesus say that? He wasn't against families, but he wanted to let his disciples and anyone out there that wanted to know what the spiritual path took to be on it, he wanted to let them know just what it takes to do that. You cannot be wishy-washy. You have to, and again, if you're wishy-washy, then you have to work on that, and get to the point where you can make that kind of a commitment. I remember growing up in my household. It was three of us: my father, my mother, and me. I was an only child, and it was a good household, a good environment to grow up in. It wasn't strange in any way. People were truthful, honest, but there was no element of spirituality or devotion. In fact, devotion was sort of looked at as something weak. You were kind of weak if you expressed that, compassion and sympathy. Now, for people in your little close circle, that might have been okay, and support them. But anybody outside of that, no, that was, not what you did. And so, each of us has their own little environment in that way that we have to deal with. And think about when you were growing up. I was just thinking about this. When you were growing up as a young child, the stories that got told again and again and again, they were your environment. And you remember those stories, like it or not, about how blood is thicker than water, and, how this relative did this to that one, and terrible they are. And, it just goes on and on. And so, you have that environment to deal with, and you have to figure out how to deal with it. Well, when we come on the spiritual path, it's an either-or thing. And that must be left behind, left behind. Now, in a way, you think, well, that could be pretty drastic and maybe cruel to those parents and that kind of thing. But, what I found in my own life, and we can all only speak from our own experiences, but I found that at a certain point, because in my family, we got along well. I was in that environment and felt pretty normal. But at a certain point, I realized that it was so gray. It just was so lacking any meaning to life. And you just, you did things because you were supposed to do them, and you got up in the morning, you went to work, and you provided meals for your family, and then you went out and you played and you had fun, and we did all of that. It was all fine. But at a certain point, I thought, you know what? I can't stand this anymore. This is not life. My spiritual karma, I think, kind of bubbled up at that point, and I thought, I was around 24, a little bit before that, and I thought, this can't be it, this can't be. When I came on the spiritual path, I realized that I had to absolutely cut that connection with my parents. And just imagine, I was a only child and a well-loved child. It wasn't that I was somebody they didn't particularly care for. But I knew that, which, happens as well in families. Everybody's got their various karmas. But so I did cut it. I just came up here. I moved here. I never went home for Christmas again. All these years, over 35 years, never went home for Christmas again. Very hard for my parents. But I thought, if I don't do that, they were not atheists, but they had absolutely no interest in the spiritual path. And this went on for, as long as they lived. So 30, 35 years. That's why I say the courage of your convictions, believe me, you have to be able to sustain that over a long, long period of time. And so how do we work with situations like that without being cruel, without getting off into attitudes that are not dharmic, that are not spiritual? You have to cut it, yes, but what do you do then? And so I found over the years, my parents still wanted to see me. They came up here from 1972 on 3 or 4 times a year. There was nothing here. It was quite a thing for them to come up here. They even came up one time for Christmas. 1975 was pretty amazing. But I found that when I went to visit them, because I thought, okay, I need to make the effort, I'll go to visit them. When I started out doing that, I thought, oh, it'll be fun. That was a disaster, let me tell you, because then I was putting myself back in their vibration, in their consciousness. If it's going to be fun, and if I had that thought, then I was in their consciousness, their world, and I would come back from that feeling like, oh my God, I don't think I can ever do this again. And then I realized I was being passive, and I needed to be active. And so then I went again. You know, it's always an experiment. You have to work on these things to get it right. But I knew I needed to get it right. And so I went again, and I thought, when I go, I'm going to be active and be with them where they're at, kind of like that phrase, be in the world but not of it. So I was in the world with them. I went, and I did not expect them ever to relate to me spiritually. It just wasn't where they were. They were not interested. They asked me once in 35 years about the gurus. I told them about it. That was it. Never asked again. You know, but it wasn't negative. They were always very supportive. They gave me money for my birthday. You know, they were supportive of me. Not of what I was doing, but of me. Well, what I was doing, they didn't know. They didn't understand. They could barely think about it. You know, your daughter's just graduated from college, and then she comes out into the woods and is living in a bus in the woods. I mean, wow. I never actually showed them that bus. I couldn't do that, but I did. When I first came here, I built a house, and I did show them that. They saw that, but it had no electricity, no running water, no nothing. You know, to me it was bliss. You know, to them it was like, what are you doing? But if I found that if I put out energy, and really was actively with them in a way that they could relate to, they enjoyed it, and I came away feeling like this was great. So, you know, it's a real process to get the spiritual path right. You cannot ever afford to back off from your convictions spiritually. Do not do it. It will leave you with nothing. You won't be able to enter back into that world, and yet you will lose your attunement spiritually with the spiritual life. It really has to be dynamic. And but dynamic in a kind way. You know, just recently, Dave Bingham, who has been doing a lot of the filming of the Bhagavad Gita shows and all of that, and a bunch of us were in Los Angeles when Swami did the programs down there, and it was a blissful weekend. It was very powerful. And Dave happened to be sitting up close. Pranaba and I were sitting way in the back of a 1,200 seat amphitheater. And we were talking afterwards about how wonderful it was. And he said, you know, what I felt most recently from Swami was kindness, but powerful kindness. You know, and it's like that with our spiritual life. There has to be the power there, and that power comes from the conviction that we hold the line, you know, we're kindly, we'll give love to people who are out there, you know, not in a spiritual flow, but we will not move out of our spiritual flow into their worldly flow. And it just has to be done. And you think, oh my God, you know, can I really do this? Yes, you can. It has to happen. If it doesn't happen, then you don't have either one. As I said before, you find yourself with your feet one in each boat, and the boats go different directions, and you know, you fall down and there's nothing left there. At the very end, after my father had passed away, and I was connecting with my mother and then caring for her at the end, there came a point where she was not doing well physically. And, you know, again, this is me after 35 years, you know, really just, but I also felt there was a dharma there to care for her, you know, just to do whatever I could do. And we were living here at the time, and this was about 4 or 5 years ago, and she had some medical problems and was in town, and I was driving back and forth every day to town, trying to do a full-time job here, and I just remember at one point thinking, I don't know how much longer I can do this, the driving and and then I thought, and I share always when it comes, and also all along, you have to share these things with Divine Mother, with Master, with, the spiritual element that can help you with it. And I said, Divine Mother, I don't know if I can do this anymore. Maybe what I need to do is to move into town and be with my mother for a while. 4 days later, my mother died. Unexpectedly, yet she had a physical condition where she could have died at any moment. But I just said openly, this is where it is. I can't figure it out any better on my own. I know this is not right and not good, but I'm willing to do what needs to happen. And that's what happened. So it's interesting. I mean, that's kind of an unusual thing to say to you all maybe in a public talk, but it was very powerful to me. And I felt the blessings of Divine Mother, both for my mother and for me. As a friend of ours said, who's in another spiritual path, she said, well, she's free and so am I. And really it was like that. She's free because she wasn't happy. My father had died. They had been married for 53 years. And, after that, can you give somebody a new life? No, no. And so we had a wonderful connection at the end, but the last few years of her life. But at that point, then it was like it was done, and so Divine Mother just, that was finished. But that ability and that importance of really keeping in touch with the decisions that you're making every moment, and not to get nervous about it or, overly strange about it, but more be aware. Be aware of where your thoughts are going, your direction, and share things with God. Share them with Master, if that's your guru. Share them with Divine Mother, but always try to turn your thoughts to that direction. Yogananda also said, he said that the first thought that comes that will take you in a particular direction, that's the time to catch it. And what he was referring to was the first thought of delusion that comes. And people can, in our age, hey, first thought, come on, just this little, but because I was just thinking about this more, the reason is that other very important phrase that he said, thoughts are universally, not individually rooted. The first thought is like a little door onto a big avenue of who knows what, sensuality, sexuality, worldliness, power, money, fame. The first little thought, just keep your eye on it. Keep your eye on it. Share it with Divine Mother. Go in that direction, and you'll find that power is there to support you in, you'll come to a place, as I did, where it seems there's no solution here. What can I do? Always invite Divine Mother, invite Master into that, because there's always ways to deal with it that will, in fact, as you open to that divine flow, take you in that deeply spiritual direction, where more and more, as we find with Swami Kriyananda these days, everything just flows, and it's in a divine flow, and you think, how can this possibly happen? One thing that's happening right now is the community in Pune. We just happened to get an email with pictures from Lisa Clark of all the things that are happening there. The one that touched me the most was the fact that the monks have built a little kutir out there, 1 or 2 of them, and 3 of them are moving out onto the land. By God, they're doing it. And I just thought, bliss, spiritual freedom, They've done it. It's happening. We all thought, how can it happen? I mean, they have to solve many, many problems there on the physical plane. But it's happening. And just looking at the pictures even, I just thought, what a joy, what a joy. It's been hard, hard work, but it is happening now. All aspects of our lives will be blessed in that way if we turn always and again and again and again, always to God.